president of the New America Foundation, I'd like to welcome you to what was intended and advertised as a debate between representatives of the McCain and Obama campaigns about technology policy, and which I think many of you, but perhaps not all of you, have discerned is now going to be a conversation between our moderator, Nick Thompson, a fellow of New America and a writer at Wired Magazine, and Reed Hundt, former chairman of the Federal Communications Commission and representative of or consultant to the Obama campaign. Just to give you a little bit of background, I feel like that prospective representative of the League of Women Voters in Mississippi who, down to the last hour or two, wasn't sure whether Senator McCain was going to turn up for the first presidential debate back in September. And we faced a similar dilemma this morning when, unfortunately, Douglas Holtz-Eakin's office informed us that he was not going to be able to attend and to represent the McCain campaign as they had promised that he would do. They and we made efforts in the ensuing hours to find another representative, a surrogate from the McCain campaign who would be available on short notice. Those efforts also failed. We then confronted the question of whether to go forward at all and decided that we should. And that's what brings us here today. We're not the League of Women Voters. We're a think tank, and we like to bring ideas forward and discourse forward in all kinds of realms. And so we're going to have, I think, a very fruitful hour or so nonetheless. The only thought I would offer by way of introduction is just an observation, which is I think we're all a little bit exhausted 2 years after this presidential campaign began and anxious for next week to put us on to the next phase of things. But I was thinking as we prepared for this event that after 2 years of debate and discourse intra-party during the primaries and then during the general election between the two parties, we've heard quite a lot about economic policy and foreign policy. We've heard a fair amount about health care policy and energy policy and even education policy. But if you were to choose a single subject in which you might argue there was the greatest gap between the daily experience of Americans and the discourse of their presidential campaign, I think you could make a case that it lies in technology policy, about which we've heard virtually nothing during the campaign, and yet connectivity and technology is a pervasive part not only of our lives as individuals, but also of our economy and of the choices that businesses make and that capital makes from day to day and week to week. And so this disconnect was the whole purpose of this debate, which was to bring some of the same rigor and discourse that you've heard about these other subjects to bear upon this critical area of policymaking. And I do regret that we're not going to have the full-form debate that we intended, but I'm very pleased that Reed Hundt has made himself available for this conversation. I really couldn't have a better interlocutor in the breadth of his experience, both as a public servant at the Federal Communications Commission during the 1990s and also in the private sector. And with that, thank you, Reed, for coming. Thank you all for coming. Our format is about 40 minutes of conversation between Nick and Reed, and then we'll leave time for about 20 minutes of your questions. When that time comes, Nick will do the choosing. Just put your hands up. If he calls upon you, please don't make a speech, ask a question, keep it brief, and wait for the microphone. Thank you.
All right. Let's turn that off. We're getting some interference. All right. Well, let's begin with one of the biggest and most important topics, which is broadband. People disagree about the statistics, but it's clear that compared to the rest of the world and compared to the other industrialized countries, the United States is falling behind. We were perhaps 5th a decade ago in the world, and now we're about 20th. What should the Obama administration, or what would Obama like to do, and how would he solve this problem to get us to catch up with the rest of the world?
This is faintly ridiculous, isn't it? Meaning, we're supposed to have a debate with the other guy. I'm gonna answer your question, but I just want to say, for the record, I'm pretty sure that McCain will show up next Tuesday. I'm reasonably confident of that, and I'm sure that that Doug had something better to do than to come and answer my questions about the BlackBerry, which you'll recall that it was Doug who said that John had invented it. And the other thing I did want to share with you before I answer this question is that I should have known that this would happen because of the following. I got a call this morning from a prominent reporter, I won't tell you which one, but I thought, I'm getting a lot of attention because of this debate. And he said, yes, he said, I'm so glad you called me back. I called him back right away. So glad you called me back. He says, how do I get in touch with your son? And I said, oh. And he said, you know, your son Nathaniel, who was a regional field director for Obama in Colorado Springs. And I said, well, I'll give him the numbers and the email. And he said, because, you know, the story of this election is not Washington. The story of this election is what has happened literally in the field. And it turned out this reporter had met my son in the very first state where he was working, which was last June. He'd graduated from college and he went to Iowa, and this reporter had met him in a small town in Iowa. And so he wants to interview him because my boy has been to Iowa and Colorado and Ohio and North Carolina, and now on into Colorado in the general election. And they sent him to Colorado Springs, Colorado, which is the world headquarters of evangelical Christianity and is as deep into the right wing as you could possibly imagine. And in fact, the results in Colorado Springs so far, we don't know the counting, but on all the other metrics, they've been amazing. My son said that at the line for early voting, in Colorado Springs yesterday, 45 minutes it took to stand in line for early voting. And he said the average age, as far as he could tell, was about 28. So there's a long way around the barn to say there's no question that whoever wins or loses, there's no question that this is the first campaign that has been infused by and suffused by communications and community. And so the point about broadband, we can talk about the technique, Nick, and what might be some good techniques, but the real point is, what's the goal? Mm-hmm. And you know, it was the goal adopted by Barack Obama from literally the very first week after he decided to run. It was the goal to have the most broad-based campaign that had ever been run in any democracy in history, period. Most broad-based. I don't know the exact count now. We're well past 3 million and going on in terms of people who actively communicate with each other and are part of a self-identified, self-chosen community that does a lot of things, They don't just give money, although my daughter, who has her my BarackObama.com page, she's in college, and whenever John McCain says something that gets her dander up, and she is a sophomore in college, and she can get her dander up on a number of different things. But whenever Senator McCain gets her dander up, she emails me. Well, she doesn't email. I forgot she doesn't actually email. She either text messages or uses Facebook. But I get this text message that said, I've just given another $5. I'm so blankety blank. And so, you know, she's part of this community. She's given $105 in $5 increments. I'm not making this up. 21 times he has gotten her so riled up. That's the real point of the broadband story, which is whether literally it is broadband or whether it is Twitter or whether it is text messages, it is the digitization of information and the creation of community at very, very low cost that, look, Barack had to be a great candidate, and I think he's been an unbelievably great candidate, and Joe has been a terrific vice president, and Michelle is like awesome, and the policies, I believe in them, but I'm also saying that the commitment from the beginning to put those roots of the campaign out deeply and broadly, you know, it has changed the campaign. All campaigns are going to be like this in the future. There will not be there won't be anywhere where people run purely top-down campaigns. So, therefore, to get to the end by answering your question, when Senator Obama and his tech policy, when it is a commitment to universal broadband, And I don't want to sound altruistic. I sure hope that we, win next Tuesday and that we beat them like a drum. But the real commitment is a commitment to have our entire democracy include absolutely everyone, and to have everyone be able to, through these tools, be able to communicate and share information in a very, very rapid way, and to really have ideas and decision-making come up from below. That's the real commitment. So when we say universal broadband, what we mean is universal community. And it happens to be that it's extremely helpful in forming an opinion about somebody to download in a hurry the YouTube clip and watch for 2 or 3 minutes. Sometimes it's amusing, but sometimes it's just plain, the best way to find out, what they're saying in real time and get the information. So it's a commitment to democracy. What is a technique? The obvious technique is to have a alteration of the Universal Service Fund and to commit it to this particular purpose. Another technique is to hold an auction in the less dense areas and see if a single provider wanted to step forward and give you the lowest bid in the auction. Another technique was the idea that my frontline guys came up with last year, which is to have a dedicated swatch of spectrum for somebody that would do a national build-out. But I just, here's the thing. Where there's a will, there's a way. You don't want to waste money on it, but you want to say, yeah, I want everyone in America connected. That's the goal you want to strive for.
So do you think that we should reclassify broadband as a right, almost like phone service? Right now, 50% of the country has broadband. It's 55% in New York City. It's not a huge percentage.
Right, privilege. The next thing you know, if Doug was here, he'd say, I'm against redistribution. And then I would say, do you believe in Social Security? And he would say, well, I sort of do for the purposes of the campaign, but if you really ask me, I actually don't. And then I'd say, do you believe in progressive income tax? And he'd say, for the purpose of the campaign, yes, but really I'm a flat taxer. You get into these, debates that I don't really think serve anything when you go back to the law school categories that I was taught, which was about 1.9 million years ago, which is the difference between right and privilege and affirmative rights and negative rights. That's not the goal. That's not the goal. The goal is, what kind of single community do we want in America? And if you say, I want everybody part of this community, then that's your decision, and everyone one way or another is in, and then you say, and I want it to be economically efficient, meaning you try to make sure you know what people are willing to pay, and the difference between the cost and what they're willing to pay, is what you've got to figure out how to build a bridge over. And that, excuse me, but in the 1930s, the decision was, we're going to have universal telephone service, and the technique was a regulated monopoly. And then behind that technique, it was long-distance prices would be really high, and they would take some of that money out of the long-distance pocket and put it in the local phone pocket, because the assumption was that 90% of the time, Diane taught me this when I went to the FCC, the assumption was 90% of the time people only wanted to call somebody who was within 3 miles. That was the assumption behind the idea of universal service. Nobody has that assumption anymore. The assumption has changed. Now I want to be able to get information from the Yahoo data center, which is in Walla Walla, Washington, or wherever they put it, to get cheap hydroelectric power. So the assumptions about what we want to share with each other change the economics. They mean the cost profile changes, and so we need an efficient technique. And the bottom line is, those techniques can be invented. Where there's a will, there's an efficient way.
And you think there wasn't a will during the past 8 years?
Absolutely not. I mean, I debated Michael Powell, who's also not here. But last week I said, look, I don't. I can understand why you would not join your father, but I want you to know, and I want you to pass it on. I thought that it was a brave and admirable thing that his father did, and nobody should doubt that a lot of Republicans are unhappy with Colin Powell for doing this, but it was a brave and an admirable thing. But Michael and I disagreed in the very first months that he became the FCC chair, because he said that saying broadband should be universal was like saying everybody should have a Mercedes, and it's a fundamental difference. It's not about right or privilege. He just thought it was a luxury. That's what that meant. And we think that it is the way to have a community that everyone, Republican and Democrat, is part of.
And it's a lot easier for your daughter, wherever she is, to make donations to the campaign.
Well, and you know what? I mean, this is the darn truth. The Republicans will run all their campaigns like this, you know, from here on out. And if they spark a broader sense of enthusiasm and a base that is willing to step up, then they're going to, you know, compete effectively.
All right, I'm gonna try to move through a lot of topics today. We've had a lot of readers of Wired Magazine who send in questions. So moving to topic 2, which is privacy.
I'm glad you have readers. No one in publishing has readers anymore.
Well, they're online readers.
Oh, those aren't readers.
And they're texting my...
They can't be monetized.
They've been sending...
They're friends.
They're sending text messages as we speak with more and more questions.
Bless them. Bless them. But those messages are costing 20 cents a minute, which is not the way it would be if the Democrats were in charge, because we would have more competition in text messaging.
And I would have even more text messages coming in.
Cheaper is more, right?
So the second topic is privacy. A lot of people are concerned with the amount of information you give to online companies, whether it's your search data, whether it's your credit card information, whether it's information about everything you buy and all the sites you visit.
Right.
Does the federal government have a proactive role that it should play in making sure that this information is safe and that people feel like their privacy will not be violated?
Yeah, I think that yes, I think that the federal government ought to take as a job undone that needs to get done the development of the appropriate legal regime for privacy. A lot of people think that the approach ought to be opt-in instead of opt-out as just a fundamental approach. A lot of other people think, you know, the important goal is to make sure that there are certain extremely private files that in fact are eminently portable, right? So that would be electronic healthcare records. I mean, you can't think of anything where it's more important that it be private, but at the same time absolutely accessible by the individual or by people authorized to act on behalf of the individual, because we know this. If you, God forbid, are in the middle of Alaska, where they have 800 kilobits a second broadband, the lowest of any state in the United States, but if you're in the middle of Alaska and you need, for some reason, to go to the emergency room, you want to be able to download to that emergency room your healthcare records, and you want it to be private, but you also want to get it right away, and you don't want to be bound to some one particular provider or their particular interface in order to get it. So here's the point. If you go to this administration, and the days are short in which you'll be able to go to them, but if you had gone to them at any time in the last 8 years and you said, who's in charge of this topic, they would say, well, we don't really know. Or they would say it's not even for the federal government to decide. I'm not saying the federal government decides. We don't have a fair idea across society of what the goal is. And I think the goal is that, you know, fundamentally it's your information, but we ought to go beyond that and have it be that things like healthcare records are the kinds of files that you can have enriched by each visit to the doctor. If you go to the x-ray and get the x-ray, you ought to be able to make sure that easily gets into the file. You don't have to walk around with a physical object this big and travel with it all over the world. If you go to a airport security and you have a pin in your leg, you know, it ought to be that you have an ability to access that information, or they do. These things are not difficult. They're not difficult. In the last 8 years, we've had a government that has perceived every small problem is nearly insurmountable and every big problem is unsolvable. That is not the way we need to think about this. We can deal with privacy, we can deal with the portability of personal information, and we can come up with good answers, and they don't have to be decided at the top. They can come up through the same process that Barack built his campaign.
Should the federal government pass a law or pass some sort of consumer bill of rights that restricts the amount of information that companies ranging from your credit card company to Google to Yahoo to Microsoft can collect and store on you? Or, for example, should they mandate that you have to opt in if this information is going to be stored for more than a year, say?
That's the kind of thing that shouldn't be decided, in my view, by one person in the new administration coming in saying, I'm making up my mind. Meaning, there's not anything wrong with a collaborative process that could include literally hundreds of thousands or millions of people. This is the way, maybe not millions in design software now, but what is Mozilla, right? What is Wikipedia? These processes are effective processes for forming a consensus view around topics like this. And when Barack talks about change from below, that's what he's talking about.
I'd love to see a wiki on privacy. That would be wonderful. Well, let's move to...
It's under P on Wikipedia.
That is true. I would like to
See,
see...
I needed someone to
set you up. Well, let's move to the topic of open government, which is something that Senator Obama has talked about a lot. What should be done by the government to make government more accessible and more open by using the internet? For example, BART in San Francisco has said, you know what, we're just going to dump all of our data. We're going to give you an open API, and you can take that data, and all you software builders, you can build whatever software you want. So now there are these wonderful applications for your cell phones that use this BART data. Could government agencies do this? Could Department of Education say, we're going to take every little bit of data we have, we don't know how to sort it, or the FCC. It's kind of hard to navigate the FCC search page right now. You have to type in the docket number. Could the FCC just say, you know what, here's all our data. You smart people, take it.
Right. Trying to figure out how to answer your question is one of the reasons that Barack came up with the idea of actually having a CTO, a job that doesn't exist in the current government, meaning you need to figure out how to recruit somebody into the government who's got the background and the acquaintance network to help you even ask the questions. And you're doing a fine job, and you may be a candidate, but everybody else I know is. But the point I'm making is, we do need to say an important part of the role of government is to ask these questions and come up with good answers. Now, and this is a big topic. In general, and now I'm speaking for myself, in general, government doesn't collect the right information in many, many sectors. It's acutely true at the FCC, where the useful information is not obtained. You can't get good information from the FCC about broadband. Now, that's the darndest thing in the world. I mean, the broadband providers have infinitely more sophisticated information about where they're delivering broadband and what are the usable bit rates and, what are people actually paying. And the FCC, is, playing some game where it pretends as if you can't know these things. So the best information about broadband in the United States comes from the OECD. I mean, what is this, right? I mean, you might want to go to France to learn about nuclear power, but you shouldn't have to go over to Europe to learn how we're doing in broadband, right? It doesn't make any sense. So first, we need to gather the information that it would be useful for everyone to know. Second, when that information is gathered, it doesn't need filtering. It needs to be that it is able to be mined by anyone because that information is a public good, and as Hal Varian said, information wants to be free. And so, we want to gather it, and we affirmatively want to increase consumer welfare by sharing this information with everyone. Now, that's about data. Now, let's take a regulatory agency, any regulatory agency. Could be the FDIC or the FCC or the SEC or the FDA, any regulatory agency. The first question is, at what point are the authorities who are accountable for the mission, at what point should they be launching their ideas for the public? And in general, the answer is a lot earlier than you've seen in this administration.
That's a great answer.
In fact, in this administration, everything that I know about has been an idea that was virtually encoded with a purpose that was obscure and a method that was sneaky. And we need to have all of this be above board because we need to actually trust in the processes of collaboration that produce really terrific results. Every company I'm on the board of, big public companies, the CEO is blogging weekly and talking to his employees, but not to everybody, right? To his employees about what's going on, his or her employees about what's going on. There's no reason why you can't get the spirit of these things and behave the same way in government. And I'm not saying that you don't have time for private thinking, and I'm not saying that the whereabouts of Osama bin Laden ought to be on the internet. I'm not saying these things. Absolutely not. But deliberative processes, they could be so much more open, and they would be better if they could be more open.
So we'll go to barackobama.typepad.com after the election and...
Might have to Twitter, but that's fine.
all right, let's move to the third rail of technology debates, which is net neutrality. It's a topic that a lot of people get very exercised about, and a lot of people
I'm
find very
for it,
confusing.
Doug's against it.
And that is one of the reasons to ask it, is that it's the clearest issue in which there's a difference between the McCain campaign and the Obama campaign. And the issue, as simply put as we can, is that telecom companies take our information, take our bits whenever we use our computers. Should they be required to treat every packet of information equally? And this is where there's a difference between the Obama campaign and the McCain campaign. Let's hear your position.
Let me start with the reality-based observation that somebody has to pay for these networks, and number two, that for the most part, these networks ought to be run on a for-profit basis. Those are just two, in my view, two pieces of reality. In other words, we're not about to nationalize broadband networks. Apparently, we're only willing in the later days of the Bush administration to do that for insurance and housing and finance. But when we look out to the future, you know, the government doesn't want to be running those businesses. Brad DeLong said the Bush people came in as social conservatives and they leave as conservative socialists. It's an era that we're going to want to put behind us. But we are going to want to move to a competitive paradigm for broadband. And we are going to want to have a wireless and wire compete within those categories and against each other. And we are going to have to recognize that there are, as there always are in all networks, consumers where the companies look at it as in healthcare as within the zone of adverse selection, meaning they don't want to be responsible for owning those customers. Bad credit, too high cost to reach them, they don't order enough, whatever. So you're going to have that problem. You have it in healthcare and you have it in all networks. So there's going to have to be some intervention to get to universality, but that by no means means that we overwhelmingly prefer that the bulk of broadband be provided for profit in a competitive environment. Why? Because we want wave after wave of technological innovation, which means wave after wave of capital expenditure. So the cable industry, based on what I have learned and have been told, needs to invest collectively about $15 billion in order to move to what I would regard as kind of the next stage of broadband. An analogous number would be truthfully stated by Verizon as to an expansion of Fios. A very large number is correctly being stated by Sprint and Clearwire and Intel vis-a-vis WiMAX. This is just reality. And these investments, they need to be made with a prospect of returns. And this is where this issue runs directly into a really, really serious conflict, and that is nobody's actually investing in anything big in any sector at all in America today. You can't find investment capital. That's the meaning of the debt markets are frozen. So it's all very abstract, you know, when you look on the business page, the debt markets are frozen. Well, you know, the Arctic is melting and the debt markets are freezing, and you know that it's bad, both those things. But what does it really mean? What it really means is no one is saying, here's $1.7 billion to build this network. Here's $4.2 billion in return for the preferred debt that will fund this activity. That has to be solved. And if you solve that in an aggressive manner, you'll be building on enough capacity that most of the net neutrality issues will become easy to solve. Right? There's always going to be the following, right? There'll always be the one human being who wants to broadcast, you know, from his computer a continuous 24-hour stream of HD TV to 5 million people for free, right? Now that one person is probably not going to have the government step in and say that's something we will subsidize. But that's not the hard case. The real hard case is incentivizing this wave of investment that right now you can't incentivize in any sector.
But if the wave of investment doesn't come and we're left in most
It's
markets...
going to have to come, or we're not going to have economic turnaround. We're going to have a wave of investment in communications and a wave of investment in energy, because we don't want a wave of investment in new households, in new homes, because we have, unfortunately, way too many people who are strung out, over-invested in real estate. You have to have a macro economy that's thriving, you have to have some micro economies that are thriving, and this has to be one of them.
Now let's say that we are in a situation where there are very few broadband providers, a couple of years from now. Should the government affirmatively pass net neutrality legislation?
Well, I think what I'm saying is, first of all, I do think there will need to be a regulatory mandate about net neutrality. I don't think that there needs to be legislation.
Okay.
The FCC had the powers to be in favor of what's now called net neutrality and was until 2001. Then something happened, and then it became in favor of it. So the regulatory powers exist. That doesn't mean you wouldn't welcome legislation, but you can do it either way.
Either way. All right.
But the main thing is this. If the money is not flowing, then you don't have an adequate solution no matter what you do. And we've got to get the money going.
Let's move to the one topic. Wired recently ran a scorecard where we evaluated the campaign's positions on a number of issues, and there was one where McCain scored substantially higher than Obama, in Wired's view, and that was H-1B visas. And the question is, what will our restrictions, limits, or quotas be on the number of high-tech, highly skilled workers who can come into this country? And McCain has said, we need more. We need more highly skilled workers. Silicon Valley needs them. Most Silicon Valley companies want the cap on H-1B visas to be raised. Obama has not said that. What is the Obama's position on this, and do we need more people under these H-1B rules?
The senator has said he's in favor of a temporary increase that is part of a broader review of the entire immigration policy, and he would like to have that broader review become an outcome, not something that we struggle on year after year after year, and the Republicans are for walls, and then they're against walls, and then they want electric walls, and then they think, well, maybe the electric walls shouldn't emit too much of a shock. And this goes on and on, and the answer is that Americans, and I'm positive this is what Senator Obama thinks, Americans want a resolution, and Americans want to know the way it's going to be, because so many of us are personally involved. It is either we've come from somewhere, or we remember that our parents did, or we have friends who just did, and we want to know what the rules are. And so when he says he wants a broader review, it's of a very, very serious problem. That doesn't mean that we don't want skilled foreign workers to come to the United States. We absolutely do. What they say, a science program at Berkeley is a place where a Russian teacher teaches a Chinese student. This is the key. Both of them ought to be able to find a way to stay in this country and to get good jobs in this country. It's not that we don't like it that they came from Russia and China, but we want it to be part of an overall solution.
Now, this is an issue where Obama has...
Most people, by the way, who come in under H-1B visas do not have advanced degrees.
Obama, when asked about this particular issue, has said, well, we have to be very careful, because we have to be very concerned that they don't take tech jobs away from Americans.
That doesn't sound like an actual literal quote.
We'll have to discuss this offline. It's an interview by Michael Arrington. I should have brought it with me. Let's move to spectrum policy.
Okay.
We'll try to run through one or two more things quickly. The FCC is going to make a decision soon on white spaces.
White spaces. We're in femtocell land.
We are. So the question on white spaces is there is a whole set of spectrum in between the broadcast channels, and this spectrum is not being used right now and could be used by technology companies for all sorts of wonderful uses. The question is, should it be auctioned off to companies? Should it just be opened up, or should it be kept the way it is? And there's a very vigorous debate about this right now. So the questions for you, this is not an issue where Obama has taken a public stand. The question for you is, what should be done about these white spaces? And if Obama is elected, there's a whole lot of other spectrum that is underutilized or unused right now. Should more of that be made open for the public or for companies to start to experiment with?
I don't know Senator Obama's views about these gaps in the digital TV channel allocation, and so I can't forecast what his view would be about it. The whole thing, speaking personally, has always really ticked me off, and I will tell you why. Because really, I have more right to say that I invented the BlackBerry than John McCain, and the reason is this. Not that I would want to make that claim, but the reason is that the FCC in January of 1997 issued the order for unlicensed spaces, that in fact did prove, just exactly as a number of people in this room told me it would do. Susan Ness is here. Susan remembers we were told that this was the right thing to do, and Susan may have grasped it. She was more of the wireless person than I. But we were told this was going to produce a wave of innovation, and what do you know it did? What do you know it did? And basically, it's on that platform that Wi-Fi, not the BlackBerry per se, this came from our brilliant spectrum policies, which McCain voted against, but the Wi-Fi revolution came from the unlicensed spaces. And the short answer is that that kind of, openness to experimentation is a great thing in government. It kind of starts with deciding that you don't know the right thing to do, right? You don't know the right technology to pick. And that's pretty terrific. In my experience of Barack, he has that kind of flexibility and experimental attitude. But I'm not telling you that I know his views on this particular topic. But he has that attitude, that approach. Sometimes he says that it's a modular approach. But the main thing is, don't start with the view that sitting in an office in Washington, you know all the answers and you can see in the 10-year direction of technology roadmaps. The companies I'm on the board of can't see that. You know, and let me tell you, they spend more time worrying about it and getting more information about it than you can, you know, at the FCC or one of these places. So what's cool about white spaces is it's an extension, at least this is the way that maybe Susan and I think of it inevitably, it's an extension of that same unlicensed approach. It's an awful long time before they've gotten around to voting on it, but better late than never.
And what about additional spectrum? If you, in fact, end up advising the Obama administration, if Obama is elected, would you advise him to open up more of the government-owned spectrum to unlicensed uses? We don't know exactly what his positions are or what they will be.
I don't know. I can't see clearly the fact situation, so I can't give you a answer on that per se. I can give you a perspective from a different point of view, which is the wireless industry has become very concentrated. That's dangerous because we want the competition model to prevail. It's actually pretty tricky for the following reason, and that is the more spectrum a particular firm has, in general, the lower cost they have. And so if there's a competitive market but everyone has a lot of spectrum, the net outcome is that you'll have lower prices and more consumer welfare. So the balance you want to strike is competition, but everyone in the competition has a lot of spectrum. The only thing you know is you don't want just one or two to be spectrum hoarders. You don't want that. So you want to have a paradigm for spectrum ownership that reflects a sensible view about cost, but also competition. So I'd like to criticize the FCC for a second, if you don't mind. They established a rule for the caps on spectrum without engaging in any respectable antitrust analysis. And the last time I looked, they had lifted the caps secretly, practically, 3 times on the eve of transactions, just high enough to be able to approve the transaction they were looking at. What is this? What is this? I mean, you ought to be able to look, down the road and have a plan that stretches at least 4 or 5 years. And that's the real answer to your question, which is get in there and then make a plan that's laid out in public and that stretches down the road 4, 5, 6, 7 years so that people in business can plan around it.
Okay. Let's move to one question that it will be more fun to have Mr. Holtz-Eakin here, but there's a lot in the McCain campaign platform on technology. There's green technology, there's patent reform, there's healthcare IT reform, there's all sorts of tax credits. Tell me what you think is the best idea in there.
The best idea?
The best idea in the McCain technology platform.
Would I be having to eliminate the untrue statements? You know, he wrote in there that John McCain has fought special interests in Washington to force the federal government, I wrote this down, to auction inefficiently used wireless spectrum. You know, that's not what John did. But if you John introduced a bill to ban the C&D auction entirely and give the spectrum to a friend of his. You know, that's what he did. It's not that I don't like him personally, but he didn't do these things. Now, what you see in terms of the good language, you know, in the beginning, you know, it's he said that he wanted to wire every school and library in America to the internet, and that's a good thing. It's not what he supported; he voted against it. But I have trouble with your question because my reaction when I read this thing is, "Holy cow!" You know, this is really distortive. Let me answer a slightly different question. He's right about cap and trade in energy policy. He's got the wrong level, but he's right that we need to get that.
Let's flip the question. Maybe that'd be more fun. What is the most pernicious idea in his technology plan? The thing that people may think looks good, but would actually do the most damage for reasons that most people might not understand.
Yeah. Oh, you know, If John actually eliminated these subsidies, the people in Alaska would see their telephone prices go up 50%, and they would see their broadband service be degraded and cost more. So I think his running mate would probably object to that particular thing. But I don't really want to pick at or pick for, you know, his policies. I think that and I don't, you know, I sure hope we win, but the voters are going to decide. A third of them have already decided, and the other 2/3 are going to decide by Tuesday. You know, I think the really, really important thing is this has been such an amazing campaign. It has really been long, but I have to say that I think it's been tremendously enriching to the discourse. Let me not do justice to your well-phrased questions, but say something else, which is this: this economic situation that the government is inheriting, whether it is going to be President McCain or whether it is President Obama, this economic situation, I don't think we've fully wrapped our minds around the complexity and the danger of it, even though we're being saturated with news about it. I asked somebody the other day, 2 days ago, where is the AIG money going? This is the U.S. government which is funding AIG. Where's the money going? He said the money is going to Europe. I said, well, how much is the commitment that we've made? And the answer is that, well, we don't know. But so far, we've apparently, we the taxpayers have committed $100 billion, which has gone out to someone, and no one in this room can tell you who's received it. That doesn't mean that it was the wrong thing to do. I'm saying we don't have our mind wrapped around the extent of the problem. That's just the insurance industry. That's just the insurance industry. There's got to come a day when we figure out again how to finance home mortgages. How are we going to do it? You know, the Fannie-Freddie model is broken. How are we going to do it? There's got to come a day real soon when we say, what do we do about the fact that 16 million families in America are paying on a mortgage that costs more than their house is worth? You could say what you want about whether they shouldn't have gotten in that situation, or they didn't read the fine print, or you could turn around the other way and say that they were the subject of very duplicit advertising. Whatever. The main point is, as long as that's the situation, we're all in it, you know, in a very serious way, and we don't know, right? So when the election is over, and you know, I really mean this, we're going to have a time period where we take a deep breath as a country, put aside partisanship, put aside, you know, robocalls, put aside me picking at John's misstatements, and say, you know, we've got to come up with answers. And what I want to just go back, and forgive me for going on too long, folks, but to your very first question, we can't say, oh, I'm so glad he got elected. Let him go off of that office and think of the right answers and then bring them out, and we'll all be grateful. It's not going to be like that. It really does have to be collaborative. It really does have to be a collective process where we all decide, that we're pretty much going to go along with these decisions. And the kinds of decisions that we have to face, I'll just end on this one. How are we going to cause $2 trillion to be invested in green energy and new transmission and efficiency in 10 years? Because if it isn't that number, then we've lost the climate change battle. So I'm not saying I know the answer, but that's what we have to do together.
We need a massive wiki. Let's open it up for questions.
I've got one.
There in the center.
Mr. Hunt, Linda Moore from CBS.
Hi, Linda.
Oh, I don't really need it. I'm loud enough. A couple of times you mentioned how competition is going to solve the problems, and you certainly did bring up one of the issues that there's a concentration of spectrum, so that the number of actual active competitors is rather small. But how are we going to bring down the price of text messages, for example? Some of the other things you said, well, competition was going to come and solve broadband. Do you have a specific suggestion that you could share? Thank you.
On the competition story?
Yes.
I think in the competition story there is a efficient amount of spectrum for every national competitor. People can debate what it is, but it's some range. Let's just say hypothetically that it's 80 to 100 megahertz, in any particular geography. But people could debate that, and I'm not saying that's the right answer. But if you had a point of view about that, then you would want an auction process that enabled multiple firms to acquire that much. So that's the simplest way, except for that after that it's really tough to figure out the technology. But it's not that tough to figure out the goal, right? It's not that tough to figure out the goal. Other elements of competition, you have to have a roaming policy. You have to have a view about openness as to content. You have to have a view about openness as to devices, no lock, no block. But it's not that difficult if you know your ultimate goal, which is you want multiple firms with the lowest possible price per bit paid by the consumer, because that's a healthy communication society. We want to be able to have everyone in America pay the smallest amount for the most communications and the smallest amount for the most energy that we possibly can, because those are both inputs. And the goal is not to enrich the energy companies or the communications companies. The goal is to have them compete to produce the outcome that I've just described. In energy, it needs to be green and not carbon emitting, which is, the extra important thing. But the goal, that's not a goal. What I just said is not a goal that has been pursued or even stated by government for 8 years. Did I not answer your question?
Well, you didn't mention the connection between the cost of text messaging and a roaming policy. There is a reason why text messages cost so much.
Which
and it
is?
has to do with roaming policy.
Meaning the absence of one.
Well, or the fact that it only requires automatic roaming for voice and certain messages, but not for the larger data messages that are the real source of revenue and growth for small number of large companies. I hope I didn't say that politically, but you didn't say what would the roaming policy be.
Would you mind if I said this is just one of the many reasons why I'm glad I'm not going to be the chairman of the FCC again? Okay.
Never mind. There's so many people who.
So to her right, and then in the back will be the next question.
Yeah, Masaya Yamashita, NTT, and I have questions. And in 1990s, one of the big regulatory push was a so-called physical access and physical focus. So much focus on the physical layers. If you see the broadband, physical layers, that is the switches and access lines to the users. So after 1996, the FCC have to prescribe so-called such as like unbundling. And in today, on such open architecture like IP, in every layer, everybody can enter this field without owning the physical layers. So it's so open today. So in that meaning, the physical access is not essential and necessary. That is, I think, two conditions for unbundling. And in the future, in rest of it, how do you see propose the new framework for the new administration? And you also touched very important things that the money have to come to provide, to invest and incentivize these physical assets. So
Well, so you said NTT, didn't you? Yeah. So when I was in Japan, I was talking to a whole bunch of rivals of NTT, and they said, you know, the unbundling was the way that we got started and created a competitive market, and it drove one of the world's great high-speed access communities. Absolutely. Then they went on and said that NTT's rollout of fiber is the end of the unbundling regime and the beginning of a new monopoly. And I said, what's the answer? And they said, we haven't figured it out yet. Meaning, this is a really important question, and I don't think there's any government in the world that has a demonstrated workable answer when you're dealing with fiber to the home. I'm just saying, I look around the world and I don't see somebody that says, we have the answer. You are making a really good point, which is it may well be that you need the competition story to move to protocols and away from the physical connection. On the other hand, that might not be true for special access. You know, I'm going to punt, meaning I don't know the answers, and I certainly, you know, don't want to imply that I, you know what some people unnamed to office would do. I don't know. But I do know this, that it's high time for us to be thinking about these things, again, I'm a broken record, in an open manner, where we come up with a collective decision and where we don't have it be, this is anti-cable, this is pro-Bell, this is pro-Bell, this is anti-cable. That's the era that we need to put behind us. And by the way, we need to put that era behind us in a hurry for the reason I mentioned before. We've got to get the investment flowing if we want our economy to recover.
So on IP, both campaigns tend to be Goldilocks-ish, you know, and just enough to incentivize innovation, but not so much we stifle it. But the secular trend has certainly been towards longer terms, broader scope of the right, more attenuated fair use, more money for enforcement, stricter penalties. And so I'm wondering if there's any of these sort of particular dimensions on which you're prepared to say that it has in fact gone too far, that it is stifling innovation and should be rolled back.
So you're talking about intellectual property rights?
Right. Sorry, yes, not.
Yeah. Let me say this about intellectual property rights. The United States is a net importer of high-tech goods. We were a net exporter until every month for something like 50 years in a row, and then about 8 or 9 years ago, every now and then there was a month where we were a net importer, usually right before Christmas. Now we're a net importer every single month all the time for high-tech goods. We are an information economy, but in terms of export, we're primarily an exporter of goods. It's almost a reciprocal. We're about 85% in a services economy domestically, and we're about 85% a goods exporter, right? In other words, it's high-value goods that is the core of our export business in America. And the most important, the richest, the most wealth-producing high-value goods are tech goods. So this is a problem. Why is it that we don't have a successful, really successful, high-tech export policy in America? And one answer is we don't get intellectual property rights respected when we're exporting in other countries. And the number one example of us not having an export that we deserve to have is selling software into Asia. That's the number one example. If we got what we deserve that should go to our software companies for their intellectual property rights when their software is used in Asia, we wouldn't be an export, we wouldn't be an importer, we would be a net exporter. We have to have a very thoughtful, very trade-focused intellectual property rights regime. A second thing, the other dimension of this trade issue is standards. So China has a wireless standard that some of you may know called TDS-CDMA, which in my view, TDS stands for totally different but the same as CDMA. Now for China, it's a government policy set in Beijing. It's called self-reliance. And what it means is we don't want to pay royalties. And what it means to us is we have to engage in a trade debate where we get an outcome that is fair. We're not interested in beggaring our neighbors, but we're interested in a fair outcome. And so intellectual property rights and standards, which by the way are cousins joined at the hip, right? Those are two central pieces of the trade agenda that we need to pursue We have not pursued it. We have not even pursued a multilateral trade agenda other than the failed Doha round, which didn't include any topics like this.
Yeah, right. You.
Hi, Daniel Berninger. I recently spent 2 weeks in Ghana, Africa, and they're in the process of going from sort of cellular phone renaissance to infotech renaissance, and they've lined up all kinds of great policies to make that happen. It seemed to me that the U.S., and they're very interested in getting help from American companies as a market for all of Africa. It seemed to me the U.S. Could facilitate that. The American government, create a trade mission to Africa and pull together a lot of infotech companies. Is that something Barack Obama?
I don't know specifically, but that sounds like an idea that, if you brought it to him, if he's elected, he would, be extremely, extremely interested. Another dimension, to pivot off that just slightly, Dan, another dimension of this economic situation that is, I'm quite certain and quite fearful will unfold is the impact on emerging economies. We're going to be unhappy here, I'm afraid, for quite a while with what we see. But what's going to happen in some of the emerging economies, including the poorest, is going to be quite dreadful if we can't figure out a way to help others even while we're helping ourselves. We're going to have to figure out how to work on a multilateral basis because we can't do it all ourselves. And we're going to have to get things going in a hurry if we're going to prevent some truly horrific outcomes as this worldwide downturn sets in and we see deflation, which is what I think we're going to see. And the reason why that's a problem is if you're selling commodity goods to keep your economy going, deflation is a bad fact for you.
I'm going to ask.
They actually don't have credit in Africa, so they're kind of not affected by the loss of credit.
That's not, but it's the buying and selling, and when they were selling the good for $1 and it's now a half a dollar, it's one thing for the United Arab Emirates to suffer that, and a very different thing for a developing economy.
I'm going to move to one of the questions that we were asked by our internet viewers who've been watching the live stream. They sent it right before, and the question is by a user named Beezer, who's sending the question through Reddit.
That doesn't, Beezer, is that your real name? Or is that the name the internet gave you?
Beezer may have, Wired magazine has also asked readers to submit their candidates to be Obama's CTO. Mr. Hunt is doing quite well. He is ahead of Steve Jobs. He's ahead of Jeff Bezos, but he is actually losing to Ron Paul.
Let's forget about that collaborative thing I mentioned earlier.
The question is, bloggers and people following the campaign on the internet have done a lot of work to knock down some of the scurrilous rumors that have circulated.
Yeah.
Do you think that the mass chatter of the web has actually improved the tone of this campaign by making it more factually accurate? Or, as many people claim, do you think it has actually made people more intense and pushed more into their corners, the Cass Sunstein argument that it's polarized people instead?
Yeah. I would say that in terms of contributing negatively to the tone, you would say robocalls are number one, and then some of the broadcast TV or cable TV stuff is number two. And I think the internet actually, has not, gotten anywhere close to being as really misleading and repugnant, as what you see in these other one-to-many or one-to-one communications. Because, here's the answer. Whether you're using a pseudonym or your real name, when you post something in the internet, you get stuff back. And people are willing to sponsor some awfully sleazy statements via robocalls, but they don't really like reading comments to their blogs, and so there is a check there, that is quite meaningful. I want to say something about blogging that I witnessed, that I in a small way participated in, and that I know had impact. And it was an amazing thing to me. Let me just report it to you and form your own views. When the Treasury floated their completely secret, absolutely opaque bailout plan that was fewer words than this on a single piece of paper. It was on the internet in 24 hours that you found 15 better ideas. And a good half of those ideas ended up in the revised version, which was many pages. And one of the better ideas, take equity, is actually what they ended up doing. But what they first proposed, which cooked up in secret, was here's it, a few words, and we're not telling you what we're really doing, and we're not giving you any explanation. And it didn't last. It didn't last. And I know the members were up there saying, what do we do? And instantly, overnight, they were getting really thoughtful input from all over. From the university of this and the college of that, and this economist and that business person. It had a huge impact, and it was so rapid. It was so rapid. We shouldn't ever praise economists too much, but they did a really good job of vetting and being constructive, and all because they were connected with each other and globally.
Let's ask one more audience question, right here in the front.
You said you were glad you weren't going to be the chairman going forward.
Yes.
Who do you think will be if?
I know who will be.
And who is that?
I gotcha. I have no idea. I mean, it's not going to be me. I'm going to see if I can beat out Steve Jobs in this vote. But Ron Paul apparently has a better shot than I do.
All right. That's it. Thank you very
Thank
much
you, everybody.
to Chairman Hunt.